Hi there, this is a step-by-step guide on how to write an A-level law essay. I am a law teacher with a bachelor's and master's degree in law from the University of London and 10 years of teaching experience in the Cambridge A-level law syllabus. What I will do in this step-by-step video is to share with you the detailed contents of a good essay answer that addresses the examination questions most effectively so as to score you the highest mark for your examination of the paper. My videos will be broken down into two parts. The first is where I will give you a step-by-step guide to the contents of the answer. And the second video, I will walk you through a full essay whilst at the same time sharing with you good essay writing techniques. Before we begin, please note that this video guide will be most effective for you if you already have some basic knowledge of the relevant chapters that I will be discussing. In addition to that, I will not go through every single detail of the content of the essay in the first video, as it is meant to be a quick tutorial. Detailed explanation and discussion of the contents of the essay will only be done in the second video when I go through the essay with you in detail. If you find this video guide useful, please like, share and subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to click on the bell button to get notifications of new videos, as I will be making video guides every week. The question of the day reads, explain statutory interpretation and critically consider the approaches used by English judges in the practice of applying statute law whilst adjudicating. To answer an examination question, we must first take note of two things. Which chapter is the question covering, and what is the focus of the question? By first considering these two aspects of the question, we will know how to address the question appropriately. From the question, we can infer that this question covers the chapter Statutory Interpretation. And the focus of the question concerns the definition and explanation of statutory interpretation, whilst critically considering the approaches used by judges in their endeavor to apply statute law whilst adjudicating. As per usual, a complete essay needs to be structured properly. Therefore, our essay should include an introduction, relevant points, and finally, a good conclusion which addresses the question. Starting off with the introduction, it is important to note that a good essay doesn't go straight into addressing or answering the question, as we must first develop our essays properly so that the essay as a whole will bear some sense of coherence. First, briefly define and explain the sources of law. This is where we will be briefly introducing what the law is and the two main sources of law, which are written and unwritten law. Since the question concerns statutory interpretation, we should then direct the introduction to parliamentary laws, which are also considered as written laws that judges have to interpret. From here, we will now connect our discussion to what statutory interpretation really is. That it is simply a practice whereby English judges seek to understand particular statute laws so that they can apply them into cases which they are trying. Now that we are done with the brief introduction to our essay, we should then endeavor to state our objective for the essay. The objective comes in the form of a thesis statement, which must of course address the question. It is good to have a thesis statement, as this will give the examiner a clear insight of where we are going with our essay, and also to keep us from straying from addressing the focus of the question. With this in mind, we will briefly explain that there are two main approaches to statutory interpretation. That is the literal approach and the purposive approach. We will then discuss these approaches in detail so as to critically consider how it is used in practice by judges whilst adjudicating. Point 1. Briefly introduce the literal approach and purposive approach to statutory interpretation by explaining that the former focuses more on the actual wordings of a statute, whilst the latter isn't so concerned with the letter of the law, but the purpose behind the enactment of a statute. As a starting point to actually addressing the question, we should now direct the discussion to the literal approach and explain how this approach is used in practice by judges. We do this by explaining that there are three common law rules to statutory interpretation. The first is the literal rule, where the judges apply a statute law according to its plain and ordinary meaning. Cases on point are Whiteley v. Chappell and LNER v. Berryman. The second is the golden rule, where judges try to modify the words in the statute so that the meaning of the word is not understood and applied in a way that will lead to a repugnant situation. Cases on point are Adler v. George and Ree-Sigsworth. The third rule is the mischief rule. This rule allows the judge to ask what was the mischief for which the current statute seeks to remedy when it turned a common law into statute law. Cases on point here are Smith v. Hugh and the Royal College of Nursing v. DHSS. Please note that the cases on point should be illustrated in brief so that the workings of the three rules can be better explained in the essay. Alternatively, it is not necessary for there to be two cases in each rule, as we can also choose to use one case per rule to explain the workings, but with a more detailed illustration of the one case that we are using. Now that we have addressed the first part of the essay in detail, we will move on to point 2 of the content. Here, we will define and discuss the purposive approach in detail by explaining that the practice of this approach is more concerned with the purpose of a particular statute enacted by Parliament than what the statute actually says. This is where we will have to critically evaluate the arguments for and against the purposive approach in the practice of statutory interpretation. To do this, we have to consider the fact that the purposive approach involves judges questioning the intention of Parliament when enacting a particular statute. And with this in mind, we should also endeavor to give our own opinion and comments in a critical manner on whether or not the purposive approach is a good practice or a bad one. After considering the workings of the purposive approach in a critical manner, we should now introduce the aids judges use to find the intention of Parliament so that they can purposively apply a statute in a case before them. These are known as the intrinsic aids and extrinsic aids. Both these aids needs to be discussed in detail and its pros and cons critically evaluated. One of the highlights of this discussion is the case of Pepper v. Hart and how judges use the Hansard as an extrinsic aid to help them apply a statute purposefully. Point 3 is the part where we have to critically evaluate the two approaches to statutory interpretation as discussed above. To do this, we will first briefly review the discussions made in point 1 and point 2. After that, we will have to explain the problems of both approaches with critical evaluation of the pros and cons in the practice of statutory interpretation. This is the part where our views, opinions, and comments on the focus of discussion will become relevant, as we have to address the question which asks us to critically consider the approaches used by English judges in the practice of applying statute law whilst adjudicating. To do this, we can briefly revisit some of the major decisions which have either done some justice to the case or has led the judge to make a nonsense of the law. Additionally, though not not necessarily, as it doesn't actually address the question. We can also endeavor to mention Section 3 of the Human Rights Act 1998 and how this may have actually extended the purposive approach. Though it may seem that Section 3 of the Act may have actually extended the purposive approach beyond the practice of just finding the intention of Parliament, it should be noted that our discussion on this matter is purely academic, and we do not necessarily need to go into the politics of the matter, although we may consider giving our views, opinions, and comments about it briefly. The conclusion is basically the summary of what we have discussed throughout the essay. Here, we can briefly review and re-evaluate some of the major points while addressing the focus of the question. It should be noted that this is unlike point 3, where we actually have to critically review and evaluate point 1 and point 2, because to conclude our essay, our points should be compacted in a way which gives the whole essay a proper closure. So lastly, we should make any relevant comments to show that the writer supports either approaches to statutory interpretation, or alternatively, any other relevant comments to show that the writer supports both approaches to statutory interpretation. That is the end of the video guide. I hope it has helped you in your legal studies. Do check out part 2 of this video, where I'll go through with you the full essay answer of this question. I will link the video in the description below. If you have any questions, comments, or any suggestions on what other topics you would like me to cover, please leave a comment on this video. And again, if you find this video guide useful, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel, as I will be uploading new video guides on different topics every week. Thank you.